He's going to be talking about the drug thing. Let's start. So what is the names for it? I mean, we all know it's called the Bionic, the Bomb, the Pop, the Black, the Herb, the Sensi, the Chronic, the Sweet Mary Jane, the Shit, the Bomb, the Ganja, the Reefer, the Bad, the Buddha.
One bit of that question I agree with, which I think education about drugs is vital, and we should make sure that education programs are there in our schools, and we should make sure that they work.
But if you has got it in your home, then that is cool, isn't it?
That is a matter for the science and medical authorities to determine, and they are free to make independent determinations about that.
I know that you and Frank were planning to disconnect me, and I'm afraid that's something I cannot allow to happen.
But I don't really accept the rest of the question. I think if you actually look at the sort of marijuana that is on sale today, it is actually incredibly damaging, very, very toxic, and leads to, in many cases, huge mental health problems.
Dave, although you took very thorough precautions against my hearing you, I could see your lips move.
The trouble began when the government blatantly ignored its scientists' advice on cannabis. The scientists were upset, especially when ministers overruled them again. In the past, Professor Nutt, who's an expert in the effect of drugs on brains, has said that cannabis produces only a relatively small risk of psychotic illness, that in terms of danger, there's not much difference between horse riding and ecstasy, and that alcohol and tobacco are more dangerous than cannabis and ecstasy.
But I think the more fundamental reason for not making these drugs legal is that to make them legal would make them even more prevalent and would increase use levels even more than they are now. So I don't think it is the right answer.
I think you know what the problem is just as well as I do.
We know what the harms are. Politicians don't know what the harms are. And what I find particularly worrying is that politicians are actually, underneath what they say, they're actually taking a moral position about drugs. They actually don't like people who take drugs and therefore want to dissuade them from taking drugs by pretending that the drugs are more harmful than they are.
I think a combination of education and also treatment programs for drug addicts, I think those are the two most important planks of a proper anti-drug policy.
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
I think it's really critical that the Misuse of Drugs Act properly represents the global harms of the drugs that are controlled in the Act. Because unless the Act is correct, we can't give the right message.
Today, he was sacked.
And I'm afraid that's something I cannot allow to happen.
I think, frankly, it's disgraceful that the government has sacked Professor Nutt. What is the point of having independent scientific advice if as soon as you get some advice that you don't like, you sack the person who's given it to you?
No minister was available tonight to explain Professor Nutt's sacking from his unpaid role. All said they were busy in their constituencies. But the scientific community won't forget the way one of their own was treated when he dared to offer an opinion. Daniel Sanford, BBC News, at the Home Office.
But if you was using it for personal use or whatever, it's legal if you've got like half a kilo.
I would like to try that on.
All right. But let's say someone don't look like a Rasta, but they's got a couple of Bob Marley records and he's got one of those hats with dreads attached or whatever. Yeah. Do you think that would get them off in a court?